The young woman working at the Thanksgiving event recognized her childhood home in a photo in the Millionaire's office. Her story turned the night upside down. Before we dive into the story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Stay tuned until the end, things are about to get intense. Now, let's get into it. The gentle hum of laughter and music drifted through the halls of the Ashcroft estate, a place that stood as a symbol of affluence and old-world charm. Thomas Ashcroft, the enigmatic millionaire whose name graced the city's philanthropy circles, moved through the grand rooms with a practiced ease. At 6 feet tall with sharp features softened by an easy smile, Thomas exuded the confidence of a man who had climbed the ladder of success rung by determined rung. He was known for his sharp business acumen, founding a chain of luxury hotels, and for the elegance that came as naturally to him as breathing. Yet beneath the polished exterior was a man more complex than the public image of him suggested. Thomas's estate, meticulously curated with art and antiques, glimmered with warmth on this crisp November day. Massive chandeliers cast golden light over a room bustling with caterers, decorators, and event planners. The Thanksgiving Charity Gala was his proudest annual tradition, a celebration of giving back to the community while showcasing the best the city had to offer. From sunrise, Thomas had been busy overseeing every detail, ensuring that the event, like each one before it, would go off without a hitch. He checked table placements, tested the quality of the floral arrangements, and even paused to sample the hors d'oeuvres, offering a rare nod of approval when they met his high standards. He stepped onto the terrace, briefly taking in the sight of guests beginning to arrive, their laughter rising into the chilly evening air. For Thomas, the gala was more than just another social event, it was a way to feel connected, even if the connections were often shallow and ephemeral. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before he turned back inside, nodding at the pianist to start the soft strains of a classical melody. In the kitchen, the flurry of preparations continued, led by a figure who, while not as ostentatiously dressed as the guests, stood out for her quiet resolve. Lily Crawford, a recent hire through a reputable event staffing agency, moved swiftly yet purposefully, arranging serving platters and making last-minute adjustments to the decorations. With her practical ponytail and plain black attire, Lily could have been overlooked, but there was a brightness in her eyes that hinted at depths beyond her modest role. Lily had worked events like this before, although none quite as grand. It was a job she had taken on a few months prior, after moving back into the city, drawn by a need for stability and the familiarity of a bustling routine. Unlike some of her peers, who would swoon at the sight of the estate's luxurious halls or Thomas Ashcroft's well-tailored suit, Lily felt detached from the grandeur. She took it in with an appreciative nod but was not the type to be easily awed. Her path to this moment had been anything but simple. After the tragic loss of her parents in a car accident when she was just 7, Lily had been placed in foster care. The years that followed were marked by uncertainty and resilience, moving from home to home until she was old enough to carve out her own life. Despite the challenges, she'd always maintained a belief in hard work and honesty, a tribute to the values her parents had taught her. This job, temporary as it was, felt like a step forward, a way to stay grounded as she mapped out the next chapter of her life. The estate kitchen was abuzz with activity, and Lily moved with practiced ease, listening intently to the head caterer's rapid instructions. As she carried a tray of polished crystal glasses into the main hall, she caught a glimpse of Thomas. He was speaking to a journalist, his smile polished and professional. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and she looked away before the weight of it could settle. Thomas, for his part, barely registered the moment, already absorbed in his next task. Lily reminded herself that tonight was simply another job, another paycheck, and shifted her focus back to the task at hand. Yet, there was a spark of curiosity in her. Stories about Thomas's generosity and success were whispered reverently among the staff. His apparent perfection seemed almost unreal. Still, gossip didn't interest her. She was here to work, not to indulge in the myths spun around a man who lived in a different world. As the afternoon light waned and the estate's chandeliers began to glow brighter, the mood shifted from organized chaos to the composed elegance befitting the occasion. Guests trickled in steadily now, their laughter mingling with the warm notes of piano music. Thomas excused himself from a conversation and strode over to the dining area, where he made sure the final touches were in place. A faint scent of cedarwood cologne followed him, complementing the earthy scent of the estate's sprawling gardens outside. Lily worked behind the scenes, setting up champagne flutes and ensuring that nothing was out of place. While others exchanged quick greetings or gushed about the latest city trends, she kept to herself, a quiet observer. At one point, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a silver platter and paused. For a brief moment, a memory surfaced, her mother's smile, warm and reassuring as they prepared Thanksgiving dinner together years ago. The memory was fleeting but tender, and she blinked it away, tightening her grip on the platter. The hours passed quickly, marked by soft music, the gentle clinking of glasses, and a murmur of lively conversation. The event had officially begun, and everything, down to the scent of cinnamon and rosemary, exuded perfection. The estate had come alive, a theater of opulence and polished traditions. Lily navigated her way through the house, balancing a silver tray filled with delicate crystal glasses as the sounds of polite conversation and distant piano music echoed down the corridor. Thomas's office was set apart from the main activity of the gala, an elegant room filled with polished mahogany shelves and artifacts that spoke of a life rich in history and achievement. Tasked with replenishing the drinks, Lily approached the office, nudging the door open with her elbow. She set the tray down gently on a small table near the door, her eyes wandering as she took in the room's refined atmosphere. As she turned to leave, something on the mantel caught her eye. The subtle, familiar outline in an old photograph froze her in place. A two-story house with white siding, a wraparound porch, and a tire swing that had once been her favorite afternoon retreat. The details tugged at the deepest parts of her memory, the creak of the floorboards when her mother laughed, the scent of apple pie baking on a lazy Sunday. For a moment, the world outside the office dissolved. Lily's throat tightened as she reached out hesitantly, fingertips brushing the frame. It was more than just a house, it was a piece of her that had been lost when everything changed. The room seemed to press down around her, the air thickening with an inexplicable weight. A sudden creak of the floor brought her crashing back to reality. She spun around, heart pounding, to see Thomas standing in the doorway. His eyes, usually warm and composed, were now narrowed with suspicion. The subtle lines on his forehead deepened as he took in the scene, Lily, frozen in front of his desk, the photograph clutched in her hands. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was measured, but carried an edge that suggested a man used to having his questions answered swiftly. Lily's mouth opened, but words failed her. She could feel the tremor in her hands, which she quickly hid by clasping them tightly behind her back. I was just, the explanation faltered, tangled with the sudden rush of emotion she hadn't prepared for. Thomas's gaze flicked between her and the photograph, and for a fleeting moment, confusion mingled with his suspicion. "The tray?" he prompted, eyeing the untouched drinks on the table. "I'm sorry," she managed, taking a step back, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to go." Before he could say anything further, she slipped past him, the pressure of unshed tears burning behind her eyes. She felt his stare follow her as she hurried down the hall, each step echoing her panic. It wasn't until she reached the safety of the bustling kitchen that she let out the breath she'd been holding. The room blurred slightly as she blinked away the tears, steadying herself against the countertop. The kitchen staff continued their preparations, oblivious to her inner turmoil. Lily reached for a dish rag, dabbing it against her temples as if the cool touch could chase away the memories stirred by that photograph. The kitchen noise, the clatter of utensils, the rush of voices, it all served as a grounding force. Still, the question remained, why did Thomas Ashcroft, a man whose life seemed a world apart from hers, have a photograph of her childhood home? Back in his office, Thomas stood motionless, the last few moments replaying in his mind. Something in Lily's reaction, the look that flashed in her eyes before she fled, unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. It wasn't the behavior of someone merely trespassing out of curiosity. He walked to the mantel, eyes narrowing as he studied the photograph himself, a keepsake that had never drawn much thought before. A relic of an old real estate deal, or so he'd always assumed. But now. Thomas set his jaw, his mind already calculating. It was unlike him to let loose ends linger, and he would make sure this mystery was no exception. But the evening's responsibilities pulled him back into the present, demanding his attention with the clinking of glasses and murmurs of the growing crowd. Meanwhile, Lily fought the urge to flee entirely. She focused on the routine, her hands moving through familiar motions as she refilled platters and arranged utensils. The other staff moved around her, some glancing curiously at the slightly glazed look in her eyes, but too occupied with their own tasks to ask questions. Her heart gradually settled into a steady, albeit nervous, rhythm. Every second away from Thomas's gaze felt like a reprieve, yet the encounter left 1,000 questions clawing at her mind. Thomas paced the edge of the hall, the echo of polite laughter and clinking glasses behind him muted by the thrum of doubt in his ears. The photograph incident gnawed at him, its implications unfurling in his mind with unsettling speed. It wasn't just curiosity, it was the look in Lily's eyes, a mixture of longing and shock, that refused to leave him. The head caterer, Mark, a burly man with a kind face and a clipboard that never seemed to leave his hand, noticed Thomas's restlessness. He approached, his brow furrowed in concern. "Mr. Ashcroft, is everything all right?" Mark's voice was as steady as ever, used to handling both kitchen crises and high-profile demands with equal patience. Thomas's eyes locked onto him, his expression sharpened by the tension he was trying to mask. "There was an incident earlier. One of your staff members, Lily," he said, as if tasting the name. "She was in my office, near my desk, acting suspiciously. I want her removed." Mark's surprise registered clearly. Lily was a reliable worker, reserved but diligent. He hesitated, glancing past Thomas to where the team bustled, unaware of the conversation happening in hushed tones. "Mr. Ashcroft, I'm sure there's an explanation. She's been with us for a while now, and there's never been an issue." "An explanation is exactly what I need," Thomas cut in, his tone brooking no argument. "But not here, not now. Find her and ask what she was doing. I don't want a scene, but if she can't give a reasonable answer, she goes." Mark's jaw tightened, the weight of the request pressing against his professional instincts. Still, the authority in Thomas's eyes left no room for negotiation. With a brief nod, he stepped away to find Lily. Lily stood at the far end of the kitchen, rinsing her hands and trying to ignore the nervous energy that still pulsed through her. She could sense eyes darting toward her, whispers skating on the edge of her awareness, but she kept her focus on the task in front of her. When Mark's voice called her name, she jumped, dropping the cloth she had been holding. "Lily, can I speak with you for a moment?" Mark's voice was firm, but not unkind. She nodded, wiping her damp hands on her apron as she followed him into a quieter alcove near the back. Mark glanced at her, a trace of worry visible. "Mr. Ashcroft raised some concerns. He found you in his office, and he wasn't pleased with how it looked." "What happened?" Lily swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. The last thing she wanted was to seem unreliable or, worse, dishonest. She shifted uncomfortably, searching for the words that wouldn't betray the emotions she'd barely managed to contain. "I wasn't stealing or touching anything valuable," she began, her voice quivering with the strain of holding back the rush of memories. "I saw a photograph on the mantel. It was my childhood home. I didn't mean to linger, but seeing it brought back memories I wasn't prepared for." She looked up at Mark, her eyes wide with sincerity. He blinked, processing this unexpected revelation. The usually composed young woman before him was suddenly raw and open, a side of her that hinted at stories untold. "Your childhood home?" he repeated, disbelief mingled with curiosity. "Why would Mr. Ashcroft have a photo of your house?" Lily exhaled, the question settling heavily in the space between them. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice tight. "But that house, it was where I lived before my parents died, before I went into foster care. I guess seeing it tonight just caught me off guard." Mark's expression softened. He'd known Lily as a hard worker, someone who kept her head down and did what needed to be done without complaint. This story, however, painted a picture of someone who had faced far more than any of them realized. He ran a hand over his stubbled chin and nodded slowly. "Stay here," he instructed, a flicker of sympathy crossing his features. "I'll explain to Mr. Ashcroft. But, Lily, be prepared, this might not end the way you hope." Left in the quiet, Lily wrapped her arms around herself, a shiver tracing her spine. The gala, with its warmth and cheer, felt a world away. All that remained was the cold grip of uncertainty and the echo of her heartbeat, steady and insistent. Mark returned to Thomas, who stood near the window, watching the event unfold with an air of practiced disinterest. The caterer's presence pulled him from his reverie. "Well?" Thomas prompted, his eyes shifting, keen for answers. Mark took a breath. Lily wasn't trying to steal or pry. She saw a photograph, one of a house. She says it was her childhood home, Mr. Ashcroft. That's why she was startled. It brought back memories of her parents, who, from what I gather, passed away when she was young. For a moment, Thomas said nothing, the information sitting between them like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. The rigidness in his posture eased ever so slightly, but his brow remained furrowed as he turned his gaze back out the window. The laughter of the guests was still audible, a reminder that the event was marching on without him. Mark waited, sensing a shift, but unsure if it meant understanding or dismissal. Thomas's face was unreadable as he finally spoke. "Thank you, Mark. Let her stay. But I'll speak to her myself. Tell her to meet me in the library," he said. The caterer, relieved yet tense, left without another word, weaving back through the busy kitchen to deliver the message. Lily, who had been numbly arranging desserts in perfect rows, felt the flutter of nerves when Mark approached. His tone was careful, soft, as he said, "Thomas wants to speak to you." "In the library." The implication was clear, this wasn't optional. The walk to the library felt longer than it was, every step echoing in the silence that followed Mark's departure. The room was warm, bookcases stretching to the ceiling with volumes that hinted at stories she could never afford to read. Thomas was already there, standing near a fireplace that cracked with low, lazy flames. His back was to her, one hand on the mantel, fingers tapping absently against the wood. When he turned, there was a glimmer of something new in his eyes, curiosity, maybe, or a reluctant understanding. "Come in," he said, gesturing to a chair. The command was softened by the faintest trace of a smile. Lily sat, her spine straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. She willed herself to remain composed, though her pulse thudded a discordant rhythm in her chest. The minutes stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. Thomas settled into the chair across from her. For a moment, he seemed unsure where to begin, the usual certainty in his posture giving way to hesitation. "Mark told me what you said," he finally offered. "About the photograph. I need to understand why it affected you the way it did." The question was simple, but the answer was not. Lily took a breath, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "That house," she said, voice steadying as she spoke, "was my childhood home. It's where I lived with my parents before they passed." She paused, the words tugging at memories that felt as vivid as yesterday and as distant as another life. "There was an accident when I was 7. After that, I went into foster care, and the house was sold." Thomas's expression shifted as realization settled over him like a blanket. His gaze flicked to the photograph on the mantel, a detail that had once been just another part of his collection. Now, it was more, a thread tying their paths together in a way neither could have expected. "Your parents' names," he said, voice just above a whisper. "What were they?" Lily hesitated, searching for the trust to share more. "Henry and Margaret Crawford," she replied, the familiar names feeling both solid and fragile on her tongue. Thomas's eyes widened, shock rippling across his composed features. He stood abruptly, turning his back to her as if the sudden movement could piece together the fragments of memory swirling in his mind. The Crawfords. He hadn't thought of that name in years, but now, faces and conversations from his early days surfaced, moments from when he was an ambitious young entrepreneur, finding his footing in a world that was quick to shut its doors. He didn't face her as he spoke next. "You may go now," he said, the words clipped, but not unkind. Before she could respond, he stepped out of the room, leaving the warmth of the fire and the gentle ticking of an unseen clock to fill the silence he left behind. Lily sat for a moment more and then left without another word, confusion mingling with an uneasy sense of hope. The encounter had opened a door she hadn't known existed, one that might lead to answers, or more questions. She glanced around the room, the leather-bound books and framed awards seeming suddenly inconsequential in the face of whatever truth had just stirred between them. Thomas stood in the hallway, bracing himself against the storm of memories. He saw a version of himself, younger, less sure, but determined. A man once aided by the kindness of strangers named Crawford. The realization deepened, the implications rippling outward until they touched every corner of his carefully built world. He would have to face that truth and, more importantly, he would have to face her. The warmth of the Thanksgiving event spread through the estate, spilling out through the large windows in golden hues. Guests mingled, toasting with glasses that sparkled under the chandelier's glow. Yet, for Thomas, the evening had taken on an unexpected weight. He stood at the edge of the room, eyes subtly tracking Lily as she moved with practiced grace through the crowd, offering plates and refilling glasses without missing a step. There was an air of distance to her now, an unspoken barrier that made her blend into the background while still drawing his focus. Lily's movements were precise, each task executed with an efficiency that spoke to years of dedication. But beneath the composed exterior, she felt Thomas's eyes on her, the silent acknowledgement of their shared history that had come crashing into their world just hours before. Each glance from him carried an energy that set her nerves on edge, making it harder to keep her expression neutral. She kept her gaze down, busying herself with mundane details, folding napkins, adjusting table decorations, anything to avoid the weight of his stare. As Thomas watched her, fragments of old memories began to surface, bits and pieces long buried by time and the rush of building an empire. The name Crawford. The memory of a kind smile from Henry Crawford, the man who had welcomed him into that very house when he was still trying to establish his first business. Back then, Henry had been a mentor of sorts, offering advice over cups of coffee and sharing stories about the value of resilience. Margaret, with her quick wit and warm hospitality, had always managed to make even the coldest days feel like spring. Thomas felt a pang of guilt. He had purchased that house at an estate sale without a second thought when it came on the market. To him, it had been an opportunity, another acquisition to bolster his portfolio. He hadn't known, or perhaps hadn't wanted to know, the story behind it. Now, standing in a room filled with the hum of cheerful voices and glittering gowns, the realization felt heavy. His eyes caught on Lily's face as she paused for a moment by the dessert table, fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She wore that same quiet resilience he remembered from her parents, and it stirred something deep within him, an echo of a promise unfulfilled. Lily sensed the shift in the air. She glanced up, only to find Thomas looking away just a beat too late, his expression shadowed with thought. The room felt smaller, the space between them crowded with unspoken words. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay composed. The gala wasn't the place to dwell on the past, and she had a job to finish. The evening moved on, but it was as if a thread now connected them, tugging faintly with each passing moment. Thomas stepped into conversations, offering practiced nods and charming smiles, yet his mind strayed back to the pieces he was trying to fit together. His memory settled on the day he signed the papers for the Crawford house, the way the realtor had mentioned it was part of an estate sale, the note of pity in her voice he had ignored. He glanced again at Lily, now standing near a group of servers, her posture just a touch too rigid. It struck him how much life had probably changed for her since the day she lost everything. That house, once a haven filled with warmth and laughter, had become just another asset for him. The realization weighed heavy, pressing down with a sense of regret he hadn't felt in years. Lily's mind, meanwhile, was a jumble of old memories and present anxieties. She remembered playing on the porch, her father's stories at bedtime, the scent of her mother's favorite lavender soap. The estate, with its grandeur, felt suffocating now, so different from the simple joy of the home she lost. And now, knowing that the man hosting this event was tied to that chapter of her life added a complexity she hadn't prepared for. "Lily?" The voice startled her, and she turned to see one of her colleagues, a young woman with bright eyes and an encouraging smile. "You okay? You look a little pale." Lily forced a smile that felt thin but convincing enough. "I'm fine, just a bit tired," she replied, brushing off the concern. But even as she spoke, she caught another glimpse of Thomas, who was now talking to an older guest, his expression distant as if his thoughts were miles away. Thomas's conversation barely registered. His mind was fixed on Henry and Margaret, the days spent in their sunlit kitchen, discussing dreams and hard work. The Crawfords hadn't just been generous, they'd been pillars in their community, known for the very charity and warmth this event now celebrated. The irony stung. He finally excused himself, needing air, needing space to process what this all meant. On the terrace, the night's chill bit into him, a bracing reminder of the present. The distant sounds of the event played behind him, a backdrop to his silent reflection. The house he now owned was more than bricks and wood, it was a connection, a responsibility, and a debt unacknowledged for too long. The hours slipped by as the event continued in full swing, but Thomas felt detached, an observer in his own home. The conversations around him blurred, and the sound of laughter became a low hum. Finally, the pull of the past proved irresistible, and he made his way to the study, away from the warmth and light of the gala. The room, dimly lit by a brass lamp, felt colder now, imbued with the silent stories of the people who had once called that house a home. He opened a cabinet, fingers brushing over the worn leather covers of old ledgers and files. Pulling out a heavy folder marked with the address of Lily's childhood home, Thomas sifted through the documents, the faint scent of aged paper filling the air. Deeds, renovation plans, transaction records, all sterile fragments of business past. But beneath these, a bundle of papers, tied together with twine, caught his attention. He slid it out carefully, the weight of its significance pressing on him even before he read the words. The first letter was written in a confident, familiar hand. It started formally but softened with each sentence, and as Thomas read, the voice of Henry Crawford seemed to echo in the room. The letter spoke of their early meetings, of a friendship that grew from shared dreams and aspirations. Henry had been more than an investor, he had been a mentor, offering not just financial backing but belief in a young entrepreneur who was still finding his way. Margaret's brief notes were there, too, thoughtful, warm additions scribbled in the margins, reminders to never forget kindness and always give back when the time comes. Thomas's eyes lingered on a photograph folded between the letters, the Crawfords on the porch of their home, smiling broadly, with a small girl holding a stuffed bear standing between them. Lily. He could see the hint of her smile, familiar yet more carefree, untouched by loss. Emotion welled in his chest, a potent mix of gratitude and regret. How could he have forgotten such important figures in his life? The years had blurred faces and names, and the busyness of ambition had buried pieces of his past under the weight of achievement. But tonight, it was clear that fate, or something close to it, had nudged these memories back into his life. Steeling himself, Thomas placed the papers and photograph carefully in a small portfolio. He stood, taking one last look at the study that now seemed less his and more a bridge to a past he owed acknowledgement. The noise of the party swelled as he re-entered the main hall, nerves coiling in his stomach as he prepared to share what he'd found. He stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room, where a string quartet had just finished a piece, their instruments still humming in the silence. A few guests glanced up curiously, the sudden appearance of the host drawing attention. Thomas cleared his throat, the murmuring settling into expectant quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady but threaded with an emotion he couldn't fully mask, "thank you all for being here tonight. This event has always been a celebration of giving, of community. And tonight, I've come to realize just how deeply this theme resonates." The crowd's collective gaze sharpened, the casual atmosphere now charged with anticipation. Lily, carrying a tray near the back of the room, felt a prickling sense of foreboding as she paused to listen. Thomas's eyes found hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. "Many years ago, I was a young man with dreams much bigger than my means. I was supported not just by business opportunities, but by people, good people, who believed in me when it mattered most." He paused, holding up the photograph he had found. The light caught the worn edges, highlighting its significance. "This is a picture of Henry and Margaret Crawford, who were not just supporters, but close friends. They made my journey possible with their unwavering faith." Gasps and soft whispers rippled through the crowd. Lily's breath caught in her throat as the weight of his words fell over her. She felt exposed, seen in a way she hadn't expected. Thomas continued, eyes sweeping the room, before landing gently back on her. "What I didn't know, until tonight, was that their daughter, Lily, has been right here among us, working with the same grace and resilience her parents embodied." Lily's vision blurred as tears stung her eyes, her heart pounding so loudly she thought everyone must hear it. Thomas's voice grew softer, almost reverent. "It is only right that we honor not just their memory, but their legacy. I am indebted to them and, by extension, to Lily, who reminds me of the kindness that shaped who I am today." A hush fell over the room, broken only by a scattered applause that quickly grew, swelling into a wave of heartfelt acknowledgement. Thomas set down the photograph and stepped from the stage, making his way through the crowd toward Lily. She stood frozen, the tray in her hands forgotten, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The room was electric, filled with the warmth of shared glances and whispered awe after Thomas's announcement. It felt as though the entire gala had shifted its focus, narrowing in on the space where Thomas and Lily stood. The photograph he had shown was passed from hand to hand, each guest treating it like a fragile piece of history they were honored to hold. Just then, a voice, aged but strong, called out from the edge of the room. "Lily Crawford?" The crowd parted as an elderly woman stepped forward, her silver hair neatly pinned back and her eyes sharp with recognition. Her pearls caught the light as she moved, a hand pressing to her chest. "I knew your parents well," she said, her voice trembling with emotion that softened the years between them. Lily turned to the woman, surprise etching her features. She wiped at the dampness on her cheeks, offering a tentative smile that wavered with the weight of the moment. "You did?" she asked, the words barely more than a whisper. The woman nodded, her gaze distant for a moment as she seemed to pull memories from the past. "Henry and Margaret were the most selfless souls I ever met. Your father helped run the community garden project back when the neighborhood was struggling. And your mother," she paused, eyes glistening. "Margaret would organize the Thanksgiving meals for families who couldn't afford them. She would light up every room she entered." Murmurs of agreement drifted through the room as a few more guests exchanged knowing nods, recalling the couple who had quietly touched so many lives. The stories that had been tucked away now floated to the surface, binding the attendees in a shared moment of nostalgia. Lily's heart swelled, the ache of loss softened by the realization that her parents hadn't been forgotten. They were still part of this world, present in the stories of those who remembered them. She looked back at Thomas, gratitude in her eyes, and he gave her a small, encouraging nod. With a deep breath, Lily stepped forward, facing the gathered guests. She felt the room grow still, anticipation threading through the air. "I didn't expect this tonight," she began, her voice steadying as she spoke. "Growing up, Thanksgiving was always more than a holiday for my parents. It was a time for community, for bringing people together. No matter how busy they were, they made sure our home was open to everyone who needed a warm meal or just a bit of kindness." A soft smile touched her lips as she continued, finding strength in the memories. "After the accident, I lost more than just them, I lost that sense of belonging they had worked so hard to create. But hearing all of you speak tonight, and knowing that their spirit lived on in the things they did, it's overwhelming in the best way possible." The audience was silent, their attention rapt. Even the clink of glasses had paused, as if the room itself held its breath. Thomas watched her, admiration flickering across his features as she spoke. It was clear that this wasn't just a night of revelations, it was the beginning of something that would change them both. The elderly guest, eyes glistening, stepped closer, taking Lily's hand in her own. "Your parents would be so proud, dear," she said, giving Lily's fingers a gentle squeeze. The small gesture felt like an anchor, grounding her in the midst of an evening that had swept her off her feet. Thomas cleared his throat, stepping forward once more. The crowd shifted their attention to him, the weight of his earlier speech still settling over them. Lily's parents believed in community and giving back, even when they had little themselves. "Tonight, in their honor, I want to commit to carrying forward that legacy." He glanced at Lily, his expression warm but resolute. "I'm pledging to rebuild the Crawford house, not as it was, but as a community center. A place where people can gather, find support, and continue the spirit of kindness that Henry and Margaret inspired." Gasps and quiet applause erupted from the crowd, faces lighting up with approval and admiration. The announcement reverberated through the room, turning a night that began as a glittering social event into something deeper, more meaningful. Lily's eyes widened, tears brimming once more as she tried to process the unexpected gesture. The house that had once been her safe haven would be a home again, not just for memories, but for new stories and new hope. She met Thomas's gaze, and for a moment there was no distance between them, only an understanding born from shared loss and newfound purpose. A woman near the front wiped a tear discreetly, and others reached for tissues as the moment sank in. The night had shifted, it was no longer about polished dresses or sparkling champagne, but about a community drawn together by the legacy of two kind souls and the promise to continue what they had begun. As the applause grew, Lily felt a warmth spread through her, a flicker of hope rekindled. She stepped back, taking a moment to breathe, the noise of the room washing over her like an embrace. The house she thought had been lost to time would now become a part of something bigger, just as her parents would have wanted. Thomas approached her, leaning close enough so only she could hear. "Thank you for being here tonight. You reminded me of what truly matters." Lily looked up at him, the sincerity in his eyes reflected in her own. "And thank you for helping me find a way back to them." The applause still lingered in the room like a soft echo, spreading warmth through the guests who gathered with newfound purpose. Faces that had previously been a sea of polite smiles now carried expressions of genuine emotion, stirred by Thomas's unexpected announcement and Lily's heartfelt words. Conversations bubbled up, filled not with the usual small talk but with plans, ideas, and memories of acts of kindness they had once witnessed or been part of. A man in a tailored suit, known for his philanthropy, stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I would like to pledge support for the new community center, in memory of Henry and Margaret Crawford. Their spirit deserves to live on in more than just stories." Others chimed in, voices overlapping as pledges followed one after another, each adding to the collective energy that now filled the room. A woman with a sparkling necklace and a kind face raised her glass. "And let's make sure it supports foster programs, too. The Crawfords gave so much to others, it's only right that we help those who need a family as much as Lily once did." There were murmurs of agreement, heads nodding, and the air grew thick with emotion. It was no longer just a charity event but the beginning of something more profound. Lily stood rooted in place, her heart swelling as she listened to these influential figures rallying behind her parents' memory. It felt as though the past, which had once been a painful shadow, was now embraced by everyone around her, transformed into a guiding light for the future. She glanced over at Thomas, who was watching the scene unfold, the flicker of a smile softening his normally composed expression. When the pledges quieted, Thomas approached her, the crowd now absorbed in excited conversations. He stopped a few steps away, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find the right words. The noise around them felt distant, leaving only the space between them charged with everything unspoken. "Lily," he began, his voice low and sincere, "I owe you an apology." He hesitated, the weight of the moment making him choose each word with care. "For being suspicious of you earlier. For not seeing you beyond the surface. Tonight made me realize that it's never too late to learn from the past and change." Lily felt the tension that had lingered between them all evening begin to ease, replaced by something more genuine. "Thank you, Thomas," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I'm grateful for what you're doing for my parents' memory. I think they would be proud of tonight." He let out a breath, one that seemed to carry away some of his earlier doubts. "I didn't just do this for them," he admitted, his tone softening. "I did it for the version of me they once believed in, and for the person you reminded me I could still be." They shared a look that spoke of understanding, the kind forged by shared memories and new revelations. In that instant, the divisions of past and present blurred, leaving only a sense of connection that was stronger than either had expected. Guests began approaching them, offering their support and kind words, breaking the moment but not the bond it had forged. Lily found herself surrounded by stories of her parents, small anecdotes from people who had crossed paths with them over the years. A man recounted how Henry had once fixed his car late at night during a storm, refusing any payment. Another spoke of Margaret's laughter filling the community center as she organized holiday events, creating warmth even in the coldest months. Each story brought Lily's parents vividly to life, turning them from cherished memories into a shared legacy. The once guarded parts of her past now felt connected to everyone in the room, as if the community her parents had nurtured so lovingly had come together to embrace her once more. Thomas stepped aside to give her space, watching as she listened to each guest, her expression a mix of joy and bittersweet longing. The guilt that had settled in his chest when he first realized who she was began to loosen. He saw now that what had started as an obligation, to right a wrong, to honor the past, had grown into something deeper. This was no longer just an act of restitution, it was a path forward, a second chance to build something lasting. The energy in the room shifted as more guests made their way to the donation table, each pledging support for the community center and programs to help foster children. The idea of building something greater, something that would carry on the spirit of generosity, resonated far beyond the initial announcement. It was as if the Crawfords' legacy, once contained to a photograph and old memories, now pulsed with life, weaving through the stories and laughter in the room. As the night began to wind down, Thomas found himself back at Lily's side. They watched as people lingered, reluctant to leave this new chapter they had all played a part in starting. "Tonight was more than I ever imagined," Lily said, turning to him, her eyes reflecting the warmth that had wrapped around the evening. "It's given me back something I thought I'd lost." Thomas met her gaze, a rare softness in his own. "And it's reminded me that even in the pursuit of success, there are more important things worth holding on to." The noise around them faded to a comfortable background hum as they stood there, connected by shared gratitude and the sense that, tonight, something bigger than themselves had begun. The guests, once scattered in clusters across the grand hall, began to gather around the long dining table set with flickering candles and simple autumn arrangements. The room, now buzzing with newfound purpose, felt different, less formal, more like a family reunion. The music softened, replaced by the natural rise and fall of voices sharing stories and laughter. What had started as an opulent gala had transformed into an intimate Thanksgiving dinner, a celebration rooted in connection rather than spectacle. Lily found herself seated near the center of the table, surrounded by familiar and unfamiliar faces, each one radiating warmth. The table was laden with dishes that evoked memories of childhood: roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, spiced cranberry sauce. The scents wrapped around her, soothing nerves she hadn't even realized were tense. Thomas, at the head of the table, glanced at the scene before him with a satisfaction that reached beyond his usual accomplishments. Tonight wasn't about power plays or networking, it was about the shared stories and memories unfolding around the table. He caught Lily's eye and raised his glass, a subtle nod that she returned with a small, grateful smile. An older gentleman with a deep laugh regaled the group with tales of past Thanksgiving antics in the neighborhood. And then Henry decided to turn the entire front lawn into a makeshift skating rink, he said, chuckling as he shook his head. Margaret stood at the window, hands on her hips, pretending to scold him while secretly loving every minute of it. The guests laughed, some wiping their eyes, and Lily felt her chest tighten, not with grief, but with a warmth that surprised her. Memories of her father's booming laugh and her mother's playful eye rolls washed over her, making her smile even as her eyes glistened. As the stories flowed and the night deepened, Thomas rose from his chair, gently clinking his glass to draw attention. The room fell quiet, the kind of silence filled with anticipation. He took a breath, eyes moving from guest to guest, before landing on Lily. Tonight has been more than a gathering, it has been a reminder of what community truly means, Thomas began, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable note of emotion. It's about being there for each other, remembering the past, and looking ahead with hope. Henry and Margaret Crawford embodied those values, and tonight, their spirit has reminded me of what matters most. He paused, eyes meeting Lily's. Lily, seeing you here has been an unexpected gift. You've shown resilience, kindness, and a deep-rooted sense of community, qualities that are becoming rarer by the day. I think you know that this isn't just about honoring the past. It's about what we build from it. Lily felt the eyes of the room shift to her, but instead of discomfort, she felt the weight of support surrounding her. Thomas took a step forward, the flickering candlelight casting soft shadows across his features. That's why I'd like to offer you a role at the Ashcroft Foundation, he continued, a genuine smile touching his lips. A role focused on community outreach, ensuring that the values your parents stood for continue to thrive. I can't think of anyone better to lead this effort. Gasps of approval and murmurs rippled across the table, punctuated by a few heartfelt hears. Lily blinked, the room shimmering slightly as she absorbed what he'd said. The idea felt overwhelming, like a door to a path she hadn't dared to consider opening. I don't know what to say, she finally managed, her voice catching. She met Thomas's eyes, searching for sincerity, and finding it in abundance. This means everything. Thomas stepped back slightly, giving her room to breathe, but the joy in the room was palpable. Take your time to think about it, he said softly, though the glint in his eyes suggested he already knew her answer. A woman across the table raised her glass. To new beginnings, she cheered, and the toast was echoed by everyone, the clinking of glasses mingling with laughter. Lily lifted her own glass, the crystal catching the candlelight, and took a sip, the warmth spreading from the inside out. As the dinner settled into a comfortable hum of conversation, Thomas returned to his seat, the weight on his shoulders feeling lighter than it had in years. Lily leaned back, a smile still playing on her lips as she listened to the stories, watched people connect, and felt the glow of something profound blooming in her chest. It wasn't just gratitude, it was the knowledge that she was part of something bigger now, a legacy that would live not just in memories, but in action. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of shared anecdotes, second helpings of dessert, and spontaneous songs that had everyone laughing. At one point, Lily caught Thomas watching her with a look that was neither pride nor relief, but something simpler, rooted in respect. As the night drew to a close and guests began to gather their coats, Lily felt Thomas approach her. The room had thinned out, leaving them with a moment of quiet amidst the remaining chatter. "Thank you, Thomas," she said, looking up at him. Her eyes, still damp from happy tears, reflected the soft glow of the candles. "No, Lily." "Thank you," he replied, a note of reverence in his voice. "For reminding me of the good that's worth nurturing." They stood there for a moment, two people from different parts of the same story, now joined by a common purpose. And as the last of the guests trickled out into the night, the house remained full, no longer just with echoes of the past, but with the promise of what was to come.